We now turn to the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and President George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, fellows. As you know, the 2020 election has already started. There's no delay, as we usually have, until Labor Day for analysis to be done early for these critical swing states. One of them happens to be Florida. And in today's Miami Herald, there was an article about Trump versus Biden in that state. And in short, even with high negatives for both Trump and the Florida's governor during the COVID crisis, the article made it clear that it's still going to be very hard for Biden to win in that state. Al, do you think this can play out in other battle states like Ohio?
First of all, elections tighten as we get closer to the election, particularly in a country that's so evenly divided as this one is. I'm not sure I agree with that Florida is going to tighten all the way, but we'll see. I mean, it's been very hard to predict Florida. In 2000, I was ready to be one of the leaders of the Lieberman transition when Florida was called for Gore midnight, midway in the evening, and then we know what happened months later. But I think that elections tighten, but there are a couple of things about this race. And first of all, Florida and Ohio, the two states you mentioned, are battleground states, yes, but they're really essential states for Trump. Trump can't win the election unless he wins both Florida and Ohio. And, he's running behind in Florida. It'll be tighter. But there are a bunch of things that make 2020 different than 2016 when the polls flipped at the end. One is Trump's an incumbent, and he's got a record. And in 2016, really, Hillary was the incumbent, basically, and Trump was an unknown, and people were willing to give him a chance. Now, on the issues that really impact Florida, like the economy and COVID mostly, he's got a record, and it's going to be a lot harder for him to recover. The other important thing is that Trump is a candidate with a high floor, which will make the election relatively close, but he's got a low ceiling. He won about a little over 48% in 2016 and won the race. If he wins that, this time he'll lose it because there's not a third-party candidate who's going to get 2 or 3 or 4%. And the final thing I'd say, there are about 7 or 8 battleground states, and in most of them, Trump is running behind, and some substantially behind. But if you look at states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, just take those 3. If Trump doesn't win one of those, he's gone. Because if you add those electoral votes to what Hillary had, Biden is over 270. So Florida will tighten. Trump may eke it out, but I still think he's got a long way to go to win the election.
What's your thoughts? You campaign in those states.
I thought that was a very good and thorough analysis with which I really do agree. I would say, though, to your question, these elections, in terms of the 2 front runners, did begin some time ago, and that's not so unusual when you've established who the front runners and likely nominees are to be, and when you have an incumbent president, certainly he's going to be nominated, we would assume. And we also are lacking a convention or 2 conventions which provide the theater in the summer that sometimes causes numbers to shift. So I think we've got a long run here. I would be cautious in terms of making too many judgments, just because I think the pollsters are out, as always, way too early, way too often. I'm not against pollsters. They tell us where the people stand at the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean where determine where they stand when election comes. I'm kind of seeing this, if I boiled it down, as fear in the economy. That's what Trump has got to overcome, the fear that the virus is going to be with us for a long period of time, and the economy, because things have to start moving again. And for him, for all the reasons Al mentioned, but for him, the fear in the economy equation is a pretty tough one to overcome. There's no sign that this virus is going to go away soon. The longer it goes, the more people know someone in their family, or they know a friend who's affected by this, and it becomes all the more real. We saw that, Dave, in some of the polling we've done in Talbot and Chestertown and Annapolis. The fear factor is very real. And so if the virus is with us, it means the economy is going to be slowed, and this notion that there may be new shutdowns is certainly not going to help. I think when people go to the polls, they're going to be filled with concerns, or they'll be relieved over an experience of 2 to 3 weeks, and they'll cast their vote accordingly. So I see it as a pretty uphill battle for the president at this point. I do agree he has a base, and that base is going to be solid, but it's not sufficient to win this election alone.
Greg, sticking with you and turning to Maryland politics, I must say I'm amazed that despite harsh criticism from Governor Larry Hogan on how President Trump has handled the COVID crisis, Trump has not directly attacked him, given that he hasn't hesitated to go after his critic for saying far less negative things, including, I might remind you, a 14-year-old climate change advocate, or one United States senator that was already deceased. Why is Hogan getting a break?
I don't know exactly why he was spared. I think there are some factors, though, that work in his favor and in Governor Hogan's favor, and that is that he's so widely supported politically that he's a hard person to go after. I also don't think that while Governor Hogan has disagreed with the president, for the most part, it's been aimed at policy matters, and it's been less personal. And what Donald Trump seems to be unable to contend with is any kind of personal criticism. And he lashes out quickly and harshly when it occurs. And I think Hogan's just avoided that, I think, as a matter of style. Also, and I'm not sure it's a factor, but it should be a factor, and that is that Governor Hogan enjoys a great deal of support from the governors. He's pulled them together. He's consulted with the CDC, the Health and Human Services, the White House. He has been at the forefront of literally building a coalition, if you will, of governors to fight this. And getting on the wrong side of him too often means also, I think, threatening a relationship with governors, and I'd like to think they see the value in that.
Al?
I have no idea why Trump doesn't attack Larry Hogan. Actually, he did. Back in April, when he opened one of his briefings after Hogan had, in the interest of the state of Maryland, bought 500,000 tests from South Korea. Trump attacked him for not understanding the labs in his state. But look, being not being attacked by Trump is not necessarily a badge of honor. He really, I think if you go back, I just tried to look back this afternoon, I don't see that he's attacked a lot of Republican governors. He's very quick to attack Democratic governors. He doesn't attack Republican governors. Maybe he's afraid they control the electoral mechanism and he won't be able to rig it or something. But he doesn't really attack Republican governors.
He did attack the Georgia Republican.
Well, yeah, very briefly, but he's really backed Governor Kemp and Governor DeSantis in Florida because they followed him on the virus, on the coronavirus. But look, who knows? you know, Governor Hogan's been a dignified leader. He's led, and what Craig said is absolutely right. I mean, he's organized the governors, uh, and so uh, I think he'd be a hard guy for Trump to attack. And the other question is, what benefit would Trump get from it? Probably none.
You know, finally, we are continuing to get letters asking you all some questions. And one wrote in today, and I quote, "Are you both surprised in light of the pandemic that school openings at every level have been politicized? To open or not open is a gruesome choice. To be subject to political whims of governors and the president, is that a good thing?"
It's not surprising in this atmosphere that every issue is politicized, and the president has, because of just the way he sort of acts off the cuff whenever he decides to say something, has really made this a political issue. But what, to me, the most surprising thing, and I guess I really am not surprised, but with this, but is that how little empathy the president shows for the kids who've got to go back to school, for the teachers, for parents, for the fact that kids come home to families with, you know, some multi-generational, and the fact, you know, he just seems to have no empathy at all. He believes that schools are necessary to get the economy going, and everybody thinks that. It's really true that we need to open schools again. And as somebody who teaches online college or graduate school courses at Johns Hopkins, you know, it's not the same as public schools, but I know the curriculum of online is very different than just going on Zoom or, you know, or broadcasting your classroom work. So it's important to get them back. But the other part of the school thing is it's really tragic. If President Trump, instead of just, you know, saying, open this and open that and get kids back to school, if he had had a smart plan for controlling the virus, and we had followed the pattern of the European countries that had big outbreaks, we wouldn't be having this argument. You know, I'm reminded I'm an old man, but when I was in high school in South Bend, Indiana in 1960, my chemistry and physics teacher said, I was all, you know, you might guess, excited about John Kennedy running for president. And he said, you know, you living here in South Bend, Indiana, it's not going to make a tinker's damn's difference to you whether Kennedy or Nixon gets elected. Well, I think what President Trump has demonstrated this year in his handling of the coronavirus and the economy and racial unrest is it does matter who's president of the United States. And I hope people take that into account as we get closer to November.
Craig, last thoughts?
I look at it a little bit through the eyes of some very good friends. I don't have kids, but I've sat with families who talk about this, who have over the course of the last couple of months made sure that they protected themselves as adults and they protected their kids. They took precautions. They were careful with whom they interacted and where they traveled. And when they traveled with the recommended mask and that sort of thing. And so it seems to me that, and I use an example from my life of flying airplanes, all of my adult life. Before you ever take the plane off, you go through a checklist. And if anything on that checklist, you know, you can't say is working properly, you don't take off. And to protect families and children so carefully from this pandemic for weeks and weeks, and then say, well, let's see if it works. Let's get those kids back in school. I find very difficult. And so while we're sitting here not far from Washington, D.C., and there's a policy debate and it's partisan over whether schools should open or not, I hope that some of these policymakers will think about it more on a family by family basis, because they're asking families to make one of the toughest decisions, and that is to have their children go into a perhaps dangerous situation. The poll that the SPY ran recently was profoundly interesting in the sense that I would have thought when the survey first came out that families with students at home would say, hey, let's get those kids back in the classroom. But the way the survey worked, people were asked whether they had students in school. Those that had students in school were much more likely to say, no, let's stick with online learning, or maybe some combination as it becomes safer. I suspect that it will be these families that ultimately work their will on this debate. It won't be partisan. It'll have a lot to do with how fast we have bad experiences, and it seems very likely we will. And parents will pretty soon say, hey, we're out of here. Whether it's college or whether it's grade school, our kids aren't going back until it's safe.
Out from Greg Fuller. Thanks again. See you next time.